somebody's like, you could have like John Lennon on the tape, and he's like, and I'll tell you the one thing you need to know to be a success, and then the tape ends, and all the listeners in their car are like, what?
Yeah, what was it?
Or maybe that's just me every time. Anyways.
So I was kind of like wondering, you kind of like created this thing, and you sort of have it in your back pocket while you go about your day-to-day work, and you have this thing that you made that feels sort of like unimpeachable. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's yours, and like nobody's criticized it yet, or it's, you know what I mean? There's kind of this like, there's this sort of like period of time between when you create something and then it kind of like finishes up, where I feel like as an artist you go through this kind of like range of emotions. Like you're proud of it, you're excited, you can't wait to get it out, it's going to be a bunch of work, but you're excited about that work. You want to play it for everybody, you want to get reviews and feedback, you want to but there's also that kind of like, in that there's a little moment before it's really released and kind of put out into the world where you sort of just get to sit with it and say like, look at this thing that I did. And I'm kind of like curious, like if you felt like you kind of gave yourself any of that time at all to sort of like just enjoy it, almost not privately, but in this sort of like little circle of like you and me and the people that made the record and a few people that heard it. That's different than when you release something out into the world, and then it's kind of like it's now a product, and I have to,
Yeah, I mean, it is different when it becomes a product, but I think, that it becomes different when when you decide it's gonna be something that you want to share.
Yeah.
And directly to your point, I like that moment where it's like just a secret.
Totally. This is kind of what I'm talking about. Yeah.
But that moment I think happens a lot because, like when I play almost every day, whether I'm improvising something or just working on stuff by myself, and those are all things that are kind of just for me in a way, just by design of nobody else hearing them, you know what I mean? So that idea that like, I've made something that's not out in the world, I don't think of that as like that special, because most of what I play is never going to be heard by anyone else, just by design of doing it every day.
Right.
You know what I mean? Every time I play the guitar for 2 hours or something at home, that's already one of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's different because it's with a band and it's a little more big production kind of thing, obviously. But
also I feel like that there even going into this stuff, there was a certain expectation, like, okay, like people are already excited from seeing pictures or like
sort of like saying putting a little stupid like tweet up or whatever, or something. Yeah, that's true, I guess.
But then there's that period of time before it's like, ready to be shared, where you're kind of like,
there was, sure, of course there's that moment where it's like over and I hear the mix, or I hear the roughs, and I'm like, wow, this actually happened, this is great, nobody knows about it. And then to hear the mix was cool, and then to hear David Torn's master was like really great, and nobody else had heard it. Yeah, but I also kind of feel like if that was it, I still would have been happy. Like if I had just made the music and it got to sounding its best, I kind of, to a large degree, like the creative side of me, my better self, had checked out almost fully at that point, because that was it.
Right.
All the rest of the stuff, the design, the little details, the kind of like things that we went back and forth about.
Yeah.
That at that point that had to be done, and it's just sort of business stuff, and we got to make sure it's done right or whatever.
Sure.
But as soon as I got the masters from David, I was like, awesome, I can die happy.
Right. Yeah.
And that would have been totally cool, And I feel like that's probably a pretty good place to be.
I totally agree.
Mentally with this thing of being a musician,
I think it's so difficult because, what I translate what you're saying as is gratitude, essentially. It's like, I'm just grateful that I did this.
For sure, yeah.
Because this is one of the most difficult parts of, like, you put something out into the world, you put money into it, time, effort, energy, and then if you feel like some of those things don't come back to you, well, now you're not, the gratitude sort of goes away and it's replaced with, like, bitterness
Yeah.
or anger or frustration.
Yeah.
And I feel like that happens to so many artists. And it's like, how do we kind of balance that thing where we're just like, you can't be in a perpetual state of gratitude, right? Like, there will come a time where you have to then, like, risk something new, But whether that's, an artistic risk or a financial risk or an emotional one, but I think that's kind of like the safe and good place to keep coming back to, is to just sort of like say, like, well, no matter what happens with this, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do it again, if we could ever get these people together again.
Yeah, this will probably never, ever happen again.
I think about that all the time.
But also, I think it takes a certain amount of just confidence in what you're doing, which, of course, like, everybody creative has gigantic looming moments of self-doubt and that manifest themselves in a variety of ways. But if you really are doing something and you believe and really believe that you are doing it 110% to the best of your honest ability, and you feel like you're investing every ounce of what you can do to be the best, like, honest musician, I feel like that is a huge aid to the emotional confidence you have in what you've done. And of course, I don't always feel that way, but I try to make sure that what I'm doing has those qualities, so that even when those tangible returns might not come back, I can sit there and say, well, it has no bearing on the actual quality of this product.
Right.
I know it's 110%.
Right.
So what else? Why does any of it matter?
Right. Yeah.
And of course, that's an idealistic sort of way to be, but I think that's important. Like you said, it's a good space to try to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like how can you stay in that as long as possible?
Yeah, without turning into like a giant ego a-hole.
Totally.
Too,
Yes. Yeah. It's always this fine line. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, if, like, on one hand, if you pat yourself on the back because you're proud or you're happy about something, you're an asshole. If you don't talk about what you did, you're a loser, and you don't have confidence. Or, what I mean? It's like every angle could have a label or a downfall attached to it.
Yeah, but if you have your own if you can find a way to have your own sort of ethical code about it,
right,
then that also doesn't matter. Just because somebody thinks this of me because I do that, or somebody thinks I didn't do that, so it means this, that's clearly not on me, that's on them, especially if I'm not assigning quality to it.
Yeah.
If I just say, like, oh, this thing went great and I'm really proud of it, and someone reads something else into that, I can't be responsible for that.
No, totally, right. I think maybe for me, the way that I kind of handle those types of things is I just keep working.
That's all you do. That's all you can do. Is
I just keep working on the next thing.
There's so many great, I'm really into reading
books, words, English.
Yeah, words. No, like kind of. Yeah, sort of like not always biographies, but books about like people that we admire or something.
Sure.
Like everybody does. And in music, there's always so much of that thing. Like the people I really look up to, it's always just like, well, you just do the work. What do you do next? Doesn't matter. You just get back to work. You do the work.
Yeah.
Anybody, Coltrane, Lanois, whoever.
Yeah.
You just do the work. It doesn't matter. You just focus and you do it, because that's the only way it's going to get done. And it's really what matters at the end of the day. None of the other stuff matters. Obviously, we want people to hear the things that we want to have people hear, for whatever reason that is. But at the end of the day, you just get back to work,
I remember reading something about Nick Cave just having like an office that he goes to with like a typewriter and a piano and a guitar.
The Nick Cave
or something.
cave?
Yeah, Nick's Cave. or his office or whatever.
He can use that if he wants
Yeah,
to.
TM, little trademark. But I before the studio, I remember reading about that and thinking like, wow, like it's an austere environment, but that's how like shit gets done, like in the beginning at the studio, we didn't even have internet and everybody complained about it. And I thought, well, I want people to focus, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we have it now because it's like you got to download projects and upload things all the time. But I tried in the beginning to have some of that, like, to bring some of that austerity in here. It's kind of like, well, we don't have Pro Tools. I'm trying to, like, create limitations, so that we don't get sucked into, like, that universe, of, like,
Smart.
micromanaging sound or,
Limitations always provide more options for creativity.
Totally, yeah. There's that great Peter Gabriel thing, and he said, musicians are like the most devious people, and as soon as you give them a limitation, they try to find a way around it.
For sure. Yep.
I kind of wanted to jump back to the trio record because I was thinking the other day about how interesting that band is. I know that people are already writing about it, and it's part of why people are interested in hearing the record. But when I think of a lot of like guitar player, quote unquote, records, or guitar leader records, I don't normally think of like albums that have quite the dedication to the ensemble as this.
No?
Well, I usually think of this just as an excuse to just do a bunch of guitar stuff, and I don't feel that way with Wall of Flowers. There's a really interesting, like, you, Keltner, and Watt have three very different musical personalities. I almost see you're the go-between that connects them, It's harder for me to see like a straighter line to connect like Watt directly to Keltner, And I mean, I know the Minutemen covered Steely Dan, and
that's right.
They covered Dr. Wu.
That's right.
And Keltner played with Steely Dan, but you get what I'm saying. Like there's a really interesting kind of like almost like these three different approaches to like groove and like composition and three different like universes or something, and that's one of the things that fascinated me about putting the group together from the very beginning. I was like, okay, this is gonna some unheard shit is gonna happen, and it did. And I'm just kind of curious for you, like, you've even spent more time with the recordings of the full session than I have, and I'm kind of curious for you, like, what listening back to it with some space, what kind of things kind of reveal themselves to you from it?
I don't know. I think just that idea that, like, it's like you said so well, it just sounds like a band. It kind of sounds like, so listening to it after the session and then listening to it a few months later and then again a few months later than that and chopping stuff up and stuff, like, it's hard to believe that it was only a day.
Right, yeah.
Because it kind of sounds, every time I would come back to the recording to sort of make some pieces or hear certain things or whatever, I don't know, I had an impression that, like, maybe that music that was recorded kept like playing together the whole time.
Yeah.
So every time I heard it, it was like tighter or better, or it was like more like a band because they'd been playing for 3 months. Or something. But yeah, I mean, it was only one day that we had all met and recorded. But yeah, it's sort of. It seemed, the more I listen to it, the less it seems like that. The more it seems like it had always existed. You've all like that Leonard Cohen tune, like, you've always been the stranger.
Right.
There's a stranger here. You've always been the stranger. It's like kind of like that.
I think the record has just this, my perspective on it was that I was trying to make sure that it was like one grand statement rather than like a pastiche of things, you know. And that's why I really enjoyed doing the solo guitar stuff, because I felt like that gave a you know, like whenever I work on a record, I'm trying to think like, look, you need some fast tunes, you need some slow tunes, you know what I mean? You need different types of energy for a different point in an album, you know? And I really feel like going into it, you know, we had your composition, so I knew that there was a certain, you know, foundational, like, through line artistically. But then it's so funny how it wound up, you know, like the solo and the duet versions of Blue Velvet, like the way that the album almost works as a kind of like mirror image front to back.
Yeah.
You know? The kind of the solo, like the way that the side 2 opens, you know what I mean? Yeah. With the more like atmospheric guitar stuff, but then you get like the 12 string and the acoustic, and you know, I feel like those types of textures they're just very thoughtful, and then when you get, you know, the drums and the bass to come in, like it means something rather than sort of just like it being a vamp on that.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's an album.
Exactly. I know. But, you know,
well, it's like a movie.
It's easier said than done, though.
Well, for sure, but it's like a movie. If you watch a movie, you don't want the whole cast talking in the movie through the whole movie.
Right.
That would be a terrible movie.
Yeah, unless you're a Robert Altman fan.
We can edit that out.
Yeah,
right?
I am a Robert Altman fan. You know, it's funny. I remember just because Nels comes up every once in a while in our conversation. The first time I did a session with him, it was at Lynn Johnston's house for Anthony Shattuck, and Chess Smith was playing drums.
Oh, nice.
And I had my stuff set up really quick, and then I don't know how I brought up like Elliot Gould or something, or Robert Altman, and Nels just starts talking shit on Elliot Gould straight away, and I was like, oh, he's gonna get the gas face, man. How you gonna diss my man Elliot Gould like that?
Oh. So what'd you do?
I don't remember, but I'm still mad about it.
Really? Jeez. What was that, like 20 years ago?
It was about 20 years ago, yeah. I'll talk to him about it.
But then what will you have to drive you?
Yeah, this is my rosebud. You know? So next week we're jumping out on the road, and I'm kind of curious, you know, when Watt sends the email saying like, hey, what do you think about doing some tunes from Contemplating the Engine Room? Which, you know, you had mentioned to me from the very beginning as like being a kind of a
total touchstone.
Right. Yeah. And then it's like, oh yeah, and we'll get Hodges to play drums, who played on that record.
Crazy.
And Nels, of course, was the guitar player. That was basically a trio record, top to bottom, really.
Yeah.
And now we're going out on the road, playing some of your tunes, playing some improv stuff, and then playing songs from Contemplating the Engine Room.
Yeah, it's
like how
super weird.
Yeah.
What else can I say? It's bananas.
But I guess like the funny thing is,
there's a few like albums that are total touchstones to me.
Yeah.
Like David Torn's What Means Solid Traveler. That was like a total mind blow album for me. Contemplating the Engine Room, mind blow album for me. A more recent one is Lanois' Flesh and Machine.
Oh yeah.
Album. That's like, you know, when I hear kind of the way great musicians like that do things that I kind of think there ought to be a way to do, and it drives me nuts. Like, what, has anybody done this? Or how do I make like electronic things sound emotional, or
right.
How do I do all these things with the guitar and music and textures?
Do you think about that? You think about like, how do I pass through technology so it doesn't just sound...
Of course. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to use all these things as a voice, and that's why I end up kind of using the things that I use, because I find a way to express with them, and I guess through them because of that. But I mean, I don't, you know, the effect things or the electronic things or whatever, or the sampling stuff, it's not there because it's, oh, I need that texture. It's there because that's the instrument. That's the instrument for me. that's the expression for me, you know. That's always kind of been the goal, you know, to the point where I stopped using a lot of electronics and effects and stuff for a while because I didn't feel like I even understood how to have a voice on just the instrument. And then I ended up going back and reincorporating those things. But that Engine Room album, the reason it was so big for me is because, you know, there's kind of two parts, right? Like one, I had always heard like, oh, you can express yourself through music, you know, and I feel like I kind of got that. Like I was like, yeah, you can sort of do these feelings and express yourself, right? But hearing like Watt's tunes, the lyrics, the story, the passion, and like emotional breadth that runs from top to bottom on that album,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, you can really express yourself through music. Whoa, that's like that's what it is. And also the idea of like, I love all these different types of music. I love jazz, I love modern classical music, country music, punk rock, you know, all these kinds of different types of music. And in a society where so often it's like, what are you? What do you play? What kind of music do you play? How do you define yourself in as few words as possible? That's obviously unrealistic for anybody that's trying to express themselves honestly as a musician. And it becomes a conundrum for a young musician, especially today, I think, when, well, maybe less today, because I think it's more accepted now to sort of think of yourself as sort of post-genre or pan-genre or whatever.
Right.
But hearing that album from, you know, from Watt, who is widely acknowledged as this great figure in punk music, but he's such a well-rounded musician.
Totally, yeah.
That it almost is like an unfair. I mean, it's a great honor for him to be known as that, but it's also sort of this sort of lasting image.
Yeah.
Or
It's almost like a
archetype
limitation.
It's almost like a limitation because he's so much more deep than just this one thing, as everybody is, of course. But anyways, back to the album, the music on that album, it runs the gamut from, you know, there's just so many different types of playing. And the fact that it was done by the same three people on the same record, that was the other part of it that was like, oh, okay, you can do this too. So now, you know, that was like my 4-minute mile at that point. At that point, I was like, oh, maybe I can do 3 minutes and 59 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, my actual mile is like 18 minutes, but you get the analogy I'm going for.
Yeah, and it's funny because now, only because you sort of like shot off in your own trajectory for many years after being inspired by that record, you find yourself like going on the road with that same rhythm section, playing some of those same songs.
It's super crazy. I can't even speak to it. It's so like fantasy campish.
Yeah, but it's like, it's also in a funny way, it's like it would have never happened if you'd tried to make it happen. It only happened because we did this record, and then you wanted to put the tour together, and then Watt offered the idea.
Well, I wanted to do like 2 or 3 gigs with Mike and Jim.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jim doesn't really travel anymore and stuff like that. And then I was like, all right, well, maybe we'll just do 1 show in L.A., and that'll be it.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought that, and then I sort of mentioned it to Watt, like, oh, maybe we could do 1 gig. And he was like, well, why don't we just do a tour? You know, maybe there's another drummer you want to ask or something. And at that point, I was like, oh, this guy really wants to try and do that with me? Okay.
Yeah.
Weird, but great. And so then I was thinking, I mean, the next obvious thing was like, oh, I wonder if Hodge would do it.
Right.
And I knew you knew him.
Sure.
Again, another person I had never met. Although we did, we crossed paths at a couple of festivals where he was with Mavis and I was with a different band or two. And so I think, well, actually, Watt put me in touch with him and gave me his number or his email or something. And I reached out, and he was down. And then it was just about finding a timeline. And
in between
and then
other obligations.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And then I got some gigs together, and then Watt was like, oh, would you want to do a couple tunes from Engine Room since it's the most of the band, and you told me it was a great record for you.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, I already know them all, so I'll relearn a couple, sure.
Sure.
I don't know, man. I feel like a lot of times I just keep saying yes, you know?
Right.
And sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes I wonder why I said yes to something, you know?
Right.
But I think
this is one of those.
I think the real secret to having a successful career in music. I was checking I was hoping the tape was going to run out. No, I think
you're the first guest to ever try to peak. What a control freak! It really speaks to your own psychosis.
I wanted to leave the cliffhanger. No, but like I just go like yes, I go sure, yeah, and then I go like, oh my God, what just happened? What do I have to do?
Yeah.
What am I responsible for? What did I get myself into? And this is one of the moments where I was like, okay, sure, and then like I kind of thought about it, and I was like, whoa, this is almost too much,
Yeah, but I guess it's so funny to me how I don't know, I guess how regularly I see these like amazing things happen only because like you didn't scheme to make them happen that way.
Well, that's just trashy though.
Yeah, but a lot of folks do it, man. I mean,
but it's still trashy.
Of course. But like
I gotta live with myself, man. I gotta sleep every night.
But yes, I mean, I've come into contact with some people over the years who are like asking for people's phone numbers and like, oh, can you put me in touch with so and so, and this is one of those funny things that because like the good work was done, you end up getting this thing that comes back to you that you could never have tried to make happen. Because that wasn't the intention. It was never. It could have been your dream since you were, since you first heard Contemplating the Engine Room, like to try to, to be the guitar player in that on that record. And now like that's actually happening, but not because you tried to make it happen. It was because like you took it, you internalized it, you created your own universe of sounds and records and projects. We finally found ourselves back here at the studio with Watt and Keltner, and now through just trying to make cool shit happen, we're going out on the road and then playing some of those songs in addition to your own. Like, to me, that's kind of like the most poetic part of the whole thing. It's not just like the Contemplating the Engine Room tunes with you on guitar. It's like, yeah, that and your songs with these guys,
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just trying to make some music. It's too much to think about it like that. I can't. It's too. It induces too much
happiness,
expectation.
Can't get too happy.
I'm a generally happy-go-lucky guy. It's just too much to think about it like that. I mean, it's.
I don't think about it. I don't think about it like that all the time. Just because we're having a fucking conversation,
Yeah, like